Alright, lesson 2, we're talking about objectives. Objectives, the two cards you get at the start of the game, which you can complete one of as long as you're not Saxony. Saxony can complete both for a star. And objectives, their variance is, and which ones you can complete, is very, very predetermined, and we're going to talk about that now. Foundations of the Empire's best objective in the game, Type 1 and Type 2. You will complete this accidentally. It counts your character, workers, mechs, and structures. It's insane. So yeah, you'll just complete this just by playing regularly. Diversify production. You do have to make slight alterations in how you move out, but since you're moving out anyway, the difference in controlling the territory you need for diversify production given tunnel movement, basically irrelevant in terms of how much more difficult it is to complete this as opposed to just moving regularly. So you'll complete this with very, very little effort. The cost is basically zero. So strong objective. Send one back as a warning. As long as you're not tight on popularity, sending one worker back is beneficial for you. You control the territory, you reduce territory from somebody who's ahead of you. Getting 7 power, something that basically everybody does. Bolster is very encouraged in this game, as we've talked about before. I will say it again if we need to talk about power. But for this lesson, I'll just take it implied. If it requires some amount of power, it's encouraged by the game, because bolster and coins are very, very closely related. Divide and conquer for Nordic and Polania factions. Very, very strong. The lakes next to the factory count for this, as well as enabling you to move to the territories to stand on the spots next to lakes. For instance, Seaworthy and Speed, when you don't have Riverwalk, can allow you to move onto those adjacent land territories. Divide and conquer is just very, very easy to do with these factions. Basically no opportunity cost, same as diversify production. You can do it just by moving out as you normally would. Shore up the shore. For Nordic, there's two options. They have the lake by their base, which is the more reliable option if they have a lot of neighbors. The lake by their base is something they can easily control 5 around. If Albion is not in the game, and if Albion and Polania especially are not in the game, controlling 5 spots around the left side lake in the top left corner, very, very doable. Albion and Accordance can also do this. I didn't label it here, but Albion can do that top left lake very, very easily, especially if you get their Riverwalk, so you can move from that village that they have by their base over to the tundra with just a move with your mech and then move the worker, one additional. Very, very strong character over there. Good options there. So Albion as well. Togoa without Rustfade can get that Riverwalk and do the 5 surrounding the lake between their base and Rustfades. Rustfade in Accordance without Togoa can do that, but they can also do lakes around the factory. And let's just be clear that when I'm talking about which ones can do it, that's really the basic requirement for this, because you want to be controlling a ton of territory. That's just a huge part of scoring in this game. So controlling 5 territory is just not a requirement. You just want to have the setup to be able to do that. Speaking of setup, we talk about the patriotic board especially, but also the mechanical board. Get rich or cry trying if you're going for a Type 1 5 worker gameplay. Very, very doable. If you go for 8 worker, it's more difficult because the produce actions are going to start costing you coins, and that gets in the way of get rich or cry trying. Patriotic does this without, just by breathing. But just a very, very simple option for 5 worker, mechanical patriotic, get rich or cry trying is just something that'll happen. Engineering board, build local infrastructure, you get these together, very, very easy to do. Building bonuses with the structure bonus, there's only one case I can think of where you would want to build 2 buildings adjacent to your home base for structure bonus, and that is farms and tundras with Togoa engineering. However, you don't have to build both of them adjacent to your home base. You can just control one of those with a trap and control one of them with a building. And then farms and tundras are abundant enough in the other parts of the map that you can very easily get the structure bonus with that anyway. Not a difficult condition. So as long as you're engineering, I say build local infrastructure is very, very doable. And last but not least is achieve tactical mastery. On anything but mechanical Crimea is very doable. Mechanical Crimea, the problem is you're actually using your resources, or you're using your combat cards aggressively for resources early in the game. So achieve tactical mastery is not really viable. You don't get up to the combat card count that you would need to. But for every other type 1 deploy and list strategy, you can actually very, very easily do achieve tactical mastery by just starting with enlist cards, because a lot of people do enlists. Enlists are very strong. And you're also going to be doing 3 more enlists yourself. So that's 3 more combat cards in addition to the 2 combat cards that enlisting itself gives you. So that's 5 plus whatever you start the game with. And then all you need to do is win a combat and have 8 or more combat cards still left in your hand. Not actually that difficult as long as you have one neighbor going for enlists. Very, very easy to do. You can play 2 combat cards and still do this. Yeah, so very strong option for type 1, usually. Then we're going to talk about the ones that are just very easy to do, very little difficulty. All the 3 certain type of territories, you just have to plan out your movement. Underworld advantage is definitely the best one. For instance, being able to like finish your mech movement onto a tunnel with some workers on it. Then your second move is a worker can use the tunnel to go to another tunnel. Then the third move, worker can move from a tunnel to another tunnel. So that's just so easy to complete, while also spreading is just super beneficial for you. So this is almost in a tier above in terms of just completing just by playing the game. So you can consider it in the above tier, honestly. This one is different from the other ones. The other ones have a little bit of difficulty. Mountains, villages are very doable for most. Tundras are very doable for most. Farms spread out a bit further, or if you're Rust Fate or Nords, sometimes you can do Harvest Advantage easily. Woodland Advantage is very doable, especially if you're Saxony or there's no Saxony. Then we talk about Divide and Conquer for the other factions. The territories outside the factory are not hotly contested. At most, it's going to be kicking a worker in order to gain control of them. So being able to move to them is very easy since they're tunnel adjacent. That means that it's very simple to move to the ones that count for this quickly, and you'll just be able to complete this. Establish a human shield. As long as you plan for it, you'll be able to do it very easily. Just know, hey, I'm going to be completing Establish a Human Shield, and then I'm going to spread from there. And last but not least is one that, so every single one we've talked about so far is one of these, like control 3 different types of territory or all that. And then there's this category of have this, do this, then this. And become a despised warmonger is the standout option. Similar to Underworld Advantage being in a tier of its own, honestly. It shouldn't be here. It should be in the tier above of completed regardless. Become a despised warmonger is in a tier above all the other options like this, or 2 tiers above even. Super, super simple to do. We talked about power and how bolster is encouraged in this game. We talked about how mechs are encouraged in this game, so those requirements are just ones that you get very, very simply for most games. Having 3 or less popularity is something that you can control by kicking workers or doing combats that require you to kick workers. Not always beneficial. Sometimes the extra points from the territory matter more. if you control enough territory and you're already on tier 2. But if tier 2 is going to require future investment from you that you just can't reach, or if it's too difficult, like you can do it but just barely, sometimes it's simpler to just say, okay, I'm going to attack this spot with 2 workers, get down to 3 popularity, and be able to complete this. And you might say to yourself, well, in that case, you're not just kicking workers, you have to be attacking as well. But presenting an advantageous attack doesn't typically require a ton of investment outside of cards. You can attack a 3v1, you can attack a 3v2, it requires less power that way. And you also get that combat star as well as become a despised warmonger as you kick their workers and win the combat. So this is just a very, very strong option in my opinion. Um, a very easy way to get 3 stars in a turn is having this card as an available resource. Um, not always something that's advised, but something that's very easy to do and sometimes is advised. Often is, honestly. Um, so yeah, conditions are just in where you want to be for a lot of games. We talk about situational objectives. These objectives can be completed super easily some games. In some games, they just are impossible to do, and you just have to count them out. So their level of effort is very, very variable. Hungry, hungry hippo. King of the Hill, sometimes you complete this just for free. Sometimes you cannot do this because the factory is tightly contested. Rustfate and Nords have the best control of the factory, assuming that Togawa or Albion cannot get their trap or flag onto the center. King of the Hill would be most easily completed by Albion with sword and shield and a flag on the center. However, you can't guarantee all those conditions. Even every game as Albion cannot result in you having all of those. Somebody can get to the factory before you, you can't contest it already. Not a guarantee. But sometimes you can. And then A Wolf Among the Sheep, sometimes you complete it incidentally, usually when you're Rustfate. But typically this will require a full 3 movement action from you to complete if you go out of your way to do it. I don't think it's worthwhile to do that to get a star as compared to just moving onto new territory. So just in my opinion, don't bother, especially factions with speed. If you don't have speed, it's a little more viable because your movement's already a little bit slowed down anyway. So you can complete this a little easier. This is most viable with Albion yet again, just because Albion has Rally, where you can move your character to a spot with a worker, so you'll often want to move your character onto a spot with a worker, and the mech can move that worker. And then as long as you move the resources with the mech and the worker, you can do it with Albion. But some other factions, it's more difficult, and sometimes it's just not doable and not worth giving up the extra territory you could be getting with that movement. So just keep in mind territory is worth points too. And then we get to the ones that are just not worth your time. We'll discuss briefly why they're not worth your time, because there's at least one significant flaw on them. And if they can be fixed for your own home games, I'll bring that up briefly too. Create a permanent foothold. Problem is, have 0 mechs. Only faction that could ever consider doing this is Togawa with engineering. Togawa engineering actually completes this rather simply, but I didn't want to put specifically a Togawa engineering faction and board combo above this point because it's not completable with anything else. That's the exception rather than the rule. Technological breakthrough, problem is 0 upgrades. You need movement upgrade, and you need to get it early for maximum benefit. Machine over muscle, no more than 3 workers is the problem. Roll up your sleeves, $2 or less is the problem. Stockpile for the winter. 9 or more is the problem. Change to 8 or more in your home games, and it can actually be doable. Hedge your bets, requiring 1 of each resource in addition to already requiring a little bit out of your way actions. Too much cost, not enough benefit. Fix for home games, typically just remove and have one of each resource at the end of your turn. It's already a bit out of your way to have to get one upgrade, one structure, and one recruit already. Balanced workforce, the only argument for this was back when patriotic Crimea was allowed in the game, and you started your game out by trading for food so you can produce and get your first enlist out immediately. Um, it's banned now, so it's not even worth having that discussion. Um, it was a discussion even when patriotic Crimea was allowed. Become a beloved pacifist, have 0 power is the problem here. Monopolize the market, the number 9 is a problem here, change to the number 8 in your home games, and then it's a difficult but achievable one. Achieve tactical mastery if you're not going for enlists, you're just never going to have the combat cards to ever consider it. And build local infrastructure if you're not building is just not doable, obviously. And that is the objectives. That is all the objectives and how viable they are, what situations can change that. And that should help inform your game. This is one of the first things that you should do when you sit down. Take a look at your objective cards, figure out, am I type 1 or type 2? How does that affect my objectives? Which one am I going to do? If any. Sometimes you actually just become a beloved pacifist and monopolize the market. And you say, well, fuck it, I guess I'm not getting an objective start of this game. And that just is how it is. Yeah, that's that. Hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll be back for lesson 3, where we start breaking down and talking about the most powerful faction board combinations in the game.